Hola, ¿qué tal amigos? Buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas noches. No importa la hora que sea, siempre es un gran momento para aprender español con Profesor Pablo. Our last lesson was lo plus adjective, all in the present tense. Now we're going to take the same lesson and put it into the past tense. Instead of saying, I can't believe how, we're going to say, I couldn't believe how. In Spanish, there are some areas that can be kind of tricky. Imperfect versus preterite is exactly what we're going to see here at the beginning, and in fact, after the adjective. Imperfect versus preterite can be a slippery concept. It just takes a lot of exposure and going over things multiple times, and it finally starts to sink in. Okay, so this will be another experience looking at imperfect versus preterite. Also, one of the other three slippery areas in Spanish, perhaps, is ser versus estar. When do you use ser and when do you use estar? We're going to look at that today again as well. And then, of course, the subjunctive. The subjunctive can be a tough topic for people, but the more we use it, the more we hear it, the more we read it, the more we see it, right? The more we speak it, the better and more skilled we get with it. And so this is a process, right? This is a process. We're on a journey to become as fluent and as knowledgeable as we can with the Spanish language. So let's take a look here. No pude and no podía creer both in English mean I could not believe, right? I couldn't believe. When do you use pude and when do you use podía? Well, if it's like a one-time thing, something happened and it's an experience, like I couldn't believe what I saw. No pude creer lo que vi. I couldn't believe it. You're talking about a one-time thing, or you're summarizing rather, something. Podía is like you close your eyes, you couldn't believe it. You open them, you couldn't believe it. You went to bed the next day, you still couldn't believe it. Every time you would think about it, you were unable to believe it. No pude and no podía creer. So we learn more by example, much more, exponentially more by example than by explanation. So let's take a look at some examples. Let's go with inteligente. Let's say you did something, you signed up for something and it saved you a lot of money and it's a one-time thing. You could say, no pude creer, I couldn't believe lo inteligente que fui. Preterite. I couldn't believe how intelligent, how smart I was. Like to take that option. No pude creer lo inteligente que fui. Let's say you went and saw someone speak and you say, wow, I couldn't believe how smart she was. No pude, we're talking about one time, no pude creer lo inteligente que era. We're going to go with era because she just wasn't smart at that moment. That was a characteristic. It was existing before you got there and after you left. No pude creer lo inteligente que era. Let's say it was a college professor or a high school teacher, right? And you want to say, I couldn't believe how smart she was. Every day when you went to school, when you went to class in college, I couldn't believe. Then you're going to go with podía because it's like a repeated past action. No podía creer lo inteligente que era. I couldn't believe how smart she was, like day in and day out every time you went to class. Let's take it rápido. Let's say you had to go in and sign up for something, paperwork, and you say, wow, I couldn't believe how fast it was. No pude creer lo rápido que fue. Let's say each year you had to go and sign up for something and it was really fast. Every year you could say, wow, I couldn't believe how fast it was, referring to all those different times, right? Reliving it. No podía creer lo rápido que era. Every time you thought about it and told friends about it, no podía creer lo rápido que era. Fácil. Again, you went to do something at City Hall, bingo, you're in and out in a minute. No pude creer lo fácil que fue. I couldn't believe how easy it was. Fue, preterite. Let's say you had to do it repeatedly in the past, right? No podía creer lo fácil que era. I couldn't believe how easy it was. It used to be. And the same thing goes with difícil, hard. Extraño. Let's say somebody weirded out and did something really strange, a bizarre thing, right? You'd say, No pude creer lo extraño que fue. Like, I couldn't understand, I couldn't believe how strange he was, like at that one interaction. No pude creer lo extraño que fue. I couldn't, I couldn't, I couldn't believe how bizarre the whole experience was. No pude creer lo extraño que fue. But if you want to say like, yeah, like the guy was strange, and I knew him for many years. I, I couldn't believe how weird he was. No podía creer lo extraño que era. Let's go with sabio. I couldn't believe, one-time experience, you heard someone speak for 10 minutes on a topic that you never understood, and you say, wow, I couldn't believe at that instant, that one instant when I went there, I couldn't believe how wise she was. No pude creer lo sabia que era. She just wasn't wise that instant. She was wise before you came in, when you were there, and after you left. Let's go with cansado. Now, the purple dots indicate that we're going to use a star. So let's go with a star. You went and saw somebody and you say, wow, yesterday's visit, I couldn't believe how tired he was. No pude creer lo cansado que, and we're going to go with estaba. I couldn't believe how tired they were. No pude creer lo cansados que estaban. I couldn't believe how tired they were. I couldn't believe, let's go with vosotros. I couldn't believe how tired you guys were. I went one time and wow, you guys were wiped out. No pude creer lo cansados que estabais. Vosotros. Let's go with loco. I couldn't believe how crazy the guy was, like all throughout your life. You heard these stories. No podía creer lo loco que estaba. No podía creer lo loco que estaba. Crazy things he would do. Let's go with triste. Now, adjectives of emotion, you can use a star with a preterite or a star with the imperfect. That's a separate upcoming lesson. The difference between estuve triste and estaba triste. Estuve triste means I got sad, like when I heard the news. Estaba triste was I was sad. I was in the condition of being sad. Like when you saw me, estaba triste. When I heard the news, cuando escuché la noticia, estuve triste. I got sad. That's going to be an upcoming lesson. It might be our next lesson. Okay, let's go with enojado. Every time you'd see a guy, he seemed to always be angry. I couldn't believe how angry he was. No podía creer lo enojado que siempre estaba, that he always was. If you want to say, I couldn't believe how mad he got, that would be no pude creer lo enojado que, and we're going to go with preterite, estuvo, with an O, que estuvo. No pude creer lo enojado que estuvo. I couldn't believe how mad he got. Sincero. One-time interaction at a business. Wow, I couldn't believe how sincere she was. No pude creer lo sincera que fue. One time. Okay? I couldn't believe how sincere she was, like every time I interacted with her, right? During the time I knew her, like, right? I couldn't believe how sincere she was. No podía creer lo sincera que era, that she was. All the time, not talking about an interaction. Let's go with embarazada, pregnant, and it's got the purple dot. It's going to be a star. I saw her for the first time. Wow, fui a verla. I went to see her. No pude creer lo embarazada que estaba. I couldn't believe how pregnant she was. Let's say you're referring to every time you saw her, right, during the last trimester of her pregnancy, you're saying, no podía creer lo embarazada que estaba. What you're saying there is every time you saw her, she was bulging. She was ready to pop. She was huge, gigantic. And no podía creer lo embarazada que estaba. That's implying that you would see her often. And often you couldn't believe how pregnant she was. Aburrido could be either ser or estar. Let's try it, okay? I went to see them, to visit them, and I couldn't believe how bored they were. No pude creer lo aburridos que estaban. Temporary condition, we're going to go with estar. Let's say you had a guest speaker that would come in like once a month. All the guest speakers, and for some reason to you, what they talked about, the topics were so doggone boring. I couldn't believe how boring they were. You're talking about the topics. No podía creer lo aburridos que eran. Characteristic. And the reason we're saying no podía, because every time they would come in with their topic, it was just so boring to you, and every time you couldn't believe how boring it was. No podía creer lo aburridos que eran. But if it's a one-time thing, like a presentation, I couldn't believe how boring it was. No pude creer lo aburrido que fue. Fue muy aburrido. All right, let's look at another one here. Ocupado. Wow, I went to see them at work. I couldn't believe how busy they were. No pude creer lo ocupados que estaban. Que estaban. You go see them at work often in the past. Every time you went to see them, they were super busy. And you want to say, I couldn't believe how busy they were. No podía creer lo ocupados que estaban. Let's go over here to tonto. No pude creer lo tonto que fui. I couldn't believe how foolish you guys were. No pude creer lo tontos que fuisteis. Que fuisteis. There's your vosotros. Let's go down to, well, right here with the dot. Estar. Estuve alegre means I got happy. Estaba alegre, I was happy. Upcoming lesson. Let's take a look at cerca. Someone showed you on a map how close by something was, and you say, wow, I couldn't believe how close by it was. No pude creer lo cerca que estaba. And let's say over time, you never could believe it was that close. No podía creer lo cerca que estaba. Pude implies like one time you couldn't believe. Podía creer means in the past, like anytime you thought about it in the past, you just couldn't believe it. That's the difference between pude and podía, preterite and perfect. Let's take a look at another one here. Grande. I could not believe how big it was. One time you went and saw a ranch. Wow. No pude creer lo grande que era. No pude creer lo grande que era. And let's say you're referring to every time you went to the ranch in the summer as you were a kid. Wow, no podía creer lo grande que era. When you say no podía creer, you're saying like time and time again, you couldn't believe how big it was. If you say no pude creer lo grande que era, it's a one-time experience. Wow, this place is huge. Let's go with preocupado, worried, okay? Let's say mom was really worried. I couldn't believe how worried mom was. No pude, one time, no pude creer lo preocupada que estaba mamá. Estúpido. There's another one with estúpido. I couldn't believe how dumb you were. No pude creer lo estúpido que fuiste. I couldn't believe how dumb I was. No pude creer lo estúpido que fui. All right, so we didn't go over every adjective to save time, but we hit all the adjectives in our lesson prior. So hopefully you feel comfortable with the adjectives. Hopefully now you're starting to get a better sense between when to use pude and podía. They both mean I couldn't, no pude or no podía. No pude, generally speaking, is a one-time experience, a reaction, your reaction to it. Wow, I couldn't believe it. Boom. No pude creer, whatever it is. How plus adjective. No podía creer is I couldn't believe over time in the past. Many, many times, I just couldn't believe every time I went there. No podía creer lo sinceras que eran. I couldn't believe how sincere those ladies were, right? I couldn't believe, I went one time to a comedy show. I couldn't believe how funny that guy was. No pude creer lo chistoso que era, because he was funny before you got there. But if it's a one-time thing that was funny, that just happened, no pude creer lo chistoso que fue. Like it. I couldn't believe how funny it was. No pude creer lo chistoso que fue. I couldn't believe how sad it was. No pude creer lo triste que fue. It was an all-the-time thing. Every time you go to this home for people suffering from whatever, right? And you say, wow, no podía creer lo triste que era. I just never could believe, right? No podía creer lo triste que era. So hopefully this helps a little bit. Going into the past, you always have that ser, well, in this case, ser versus estar with these adjectives. But when you go into the past with a verb, you're talking about imperfect versus preterite. And of course, here we had, is it imperfect versus preterite? Or in addition, is it ser versus estar? Okay, hopefully that helps. We're going to do our next lesson, estar plus adjective in the preterite, and then in the imperfect to contrast the difference. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Hasta la próxima lección. Tengan un gran día. Tomen su agua. Cuídense. Nos vemos pronto. Colorín colorado. Esta lección se ha enseñado. Adiós.